Color Efex Pro 4 is a collection of 55 individual filters. Each filter has its own tool set for adjusting different things, different attributes to create a different kind of image, or to control the photograph in a different way. In this video, we'll take a look at 4 of the different filters that are oriented towards controlling contrast in a photograph, and talk about how to use them, when to use them, and take a good look at the differences between each. So we've opened up this first photograph into the Contrast Color Range filter, which provides control over contrast between selected colors in an image. Now, what that means is that when we've got a photograph where we have contrasting colors, meaning colors that are on the opposite end of the color spectrum from each other, we're able to create more contrast between those objects. In this case, we've got the blue in the foreground and then the warmth of the yellow and the red within her skin here. So if we move into the upper right-hand corner, we can first select the color that we want to affect the color range in. So by clicking the color slider, we can slide this back and forth, and what's happening is we're selecting out a particular color range and then adding in contrast based upon that color. Now, I want to separate her from the background and her from the foreground just a bit. By setting the color to something close to her skin color, that's going to lighten up, while the foreground here, the blue, is going to darken down slightly. In fact, if we take a quick look at the before and after, here's the before, there's the after. Now the color slider gives us the control to choose the color. Then we can decide how much contrast we want to add in. Bringing it up to 200% in this case makes her glow quite a bit, but probably is a little bit too harsh, a little bit too much of an effect. So we'll bring the contrast, or the color contrast slider rather, down just a bit. From there we have a brightness adjustment as well as a typical contrast slider as well. So if we wanted to increase or decrease the amount of overall contrast in the image, we can control that within the contrast color range slider, or contrast color range filter. Now don't forget that you always have control points built into each of the filters in Color Efex Pro 4. This is going to come in really handy when we have a situation like this, where in the original image, we've got full detail within her dress as well as within her hair, whereas now I'm sort of blowing out the highlights in her dress as well as blocking up the shadows in her hair. So we can either use control points, minus control points to remove the filter, or plus control points to put the effect in, or in many of the filters in Color Efex Pro 4, you have shadow and highlight protection sliders, where we can actually protect those bright highlights and protect the very darkest shadows from going totally black. With that, we've taken a quick look at our contrast color range filter and when we would use it. And that is typically whenever we have a contrast between two different colors and we want to exaggerate that contrast, like we've done here in the foreground and in her skin tone. The next filter that we'll get into is the contrast only filter. Now, the first difference between the contrast color range filter and contrast only is that the contrast color range filter we're going to use in specific situations where we have those contrasting colors. The contrast only filter is one that I would consider more of a utility. You can use it on almost any kind of photograph. And the benefit of the contrast only filter is that it provides a range of different contrast controls, which includes the contrast only method, or slider, which adjusts contrast without affecting the color in the objects. In fact, to talk about that a little bit more, I'm going to zero out the soft contrast slider. So we'll bring that up to 0. I'm going to take our contrast only slider down to 0 as well. So right now we're not actually affecting the image with the application of this filter. Starting at the top and working our way down, we have a brightness slider, and actually overall I would say the image is a little bit bright, so I'm just going to take that down just a touch, giving us a nice little bit of control over our brightness. Then you have a contrast slider, which affects contrast. It lightens the lighter tones, darkens the darker tones within the image, but what a typical contrast slider will do, or this one, will actually adjust the color as well. So like most sort of typical contrast tools, if I add contrast, it lightens the highlights, darkens the darker tones, and it affects color. The benefit of contrast only, the next slider, is that we're able to adjust the luminosity, the density in the image, the actual contrast, and we're not affecting the color. Now, underneath this contrast only slider, we have a soft contrast adjustment. And if you slide this to the right, we're adding contrast, but it gives you this soft kind of glow-like effect. Now, what's so great about the contrast only filter is that it combines these three different kinds of contrast tools together. So I can then control the brightness overall, we can adjust regular contrast, and we can kind of expect or know what to expect with that slider. We can then adjust the contrast overall without affecting the color, and then we've got this kind of soft glow-like contrast slider as well. Not to mention, if we wanted to, we can actually control the saturation in the contrast only filter. Now, what this comes down to, contrast only, is it gives us this really nice overall way of controlling contrast with three different kinds of contrast controls, and then sort of overreaching or reaching beyond that, you've got a brightness tool and saturation. Of course, as well as your shadow and highlight protection sliders and control points. You can use those when you want to selectively adjust the image, of course. Now, our third photo here, we'll delve into and talk about the Pro Contrast filter. First of all, the Pro Contrast filter provides advanced control over the color and contrast of the photo. It does this by analyzing each image and creating a unique enhancement specific to that photo. Using this image, you can introduce high levels of contrast while maintaining detail throughout the photograph. So it'll help to protect the shadows and the highlights sort of automatically. So the first difference that we come to between the contrast only filter and our Pro Contrast filter here is that the contrast only kind of leaves the control to you. It puts it in your hands, whereas the Pro Contrast filter is very automated. It kind of does it by itself with the three sliders in the upper right-hand corner, and then you have control. Meaning you can correct the contrasts and correct the color cast. If you had any issue with your color cast, we could remove or adjust the color. Pardon. We can then adjust or optimize the contrast. So sliding the correct contrast slider up into the right, it's going to attempt to optimize the contrast throughout the entire photograph. And again, analyzing the image, it tries to make sure that we don't blow out highlights or block up shadows. Dynamic contrast, this next slider, is an adaptive adjustment, which means it affects certain tones more so than others. What that means we can do is we can optimize the contrast kind of overall with the correction slider, and then we can add in a little extra dynamic pop, if you will, a little extra contrast with the dynamic contrast slider. In fact, taking a quick look at the before and after, you'll see we'll be able to optimize an image that has almost no contrast, it's very, very flat in the original image, to something that has a lot more dimension to it. And really, the main difference between contrast only and the Pro Contrast filter is the fact that this is kind of automated, and then you go in and control it using shadow and highlight protection sliders as well as control points. Moving into our fourth and final filter, we'll talk about the Tonal Contrast filter. Now, this tool provides powerful control over textures and details found throughout your photo. Taking a quick look at the default settings, right now we've got the filter off, but if we click on the checkbox that's to the left of the Tonal Contrast label, we can take a quick look at the before and after. So again, the before and the after. Now, Tonal Contrast is a very different tool compared to Contrast Color Range, Contrast Only, or Pro Contrast. In fact, the Contrast Color Range, we're going to put that off to the side. It's its own kind of filter. We use it in situations where we've got these contrasting colors, and we want to exaggerate the contrast between those two colors, or between a set of colors. Contrast Only and Pro Contrast, I'd kind of consider those to be utility tools, basically helping us to optimize the contrast within the photo. Well, Tonal Contrast is very different from any of those. This is designed specifically for controlling the texture within the image, as we can see here. What that means is that this filter will work hand in hand with any of those other contrast tools when we want to be able to control texture within the photo. Now, with that, in the tonal contrast filter, you've got highlights, midtones, and shadow texture control. A saturation tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just desaturate or bring the saturation slider down to about 0. This is going to kind of mute the overall color in the image. Actually, by not changing the color, but adding in this contrast, we should get this really nice feel to the photo. I want to increase my highlights texture and then a little bit into my shadow texture as well. But with that, we move into the contrast type, which is this drop-down menu here where we have 5 different contrast types. Now, what these do is control the way that this filter, tonal contrast, is going to affect and control the textures. Standard is this. It's the standard control. High pass is going to emulate a high pass sharpening kind of effect. Fine, balanced, and strong are going to give us 3 other ways of controlling and affecting these textures. Of course, underneath your contrast type, again, you have a shadow and highlight protection sliders, as well as the control points for being able to selectively add the effect in. So tonal contrast works really well with Pro Contrast and Contrast Only, as well as with the Contrast Color Range filter. But as you can see, it's a very different kind of tool. It's more of a detail-oriented tool than an overall utility contrast effect. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've taken a look at 4 of the different contrast tools within Color Efex Pro 4.